Hey, welcome back. This is number 7. This is the 7th program on our accelerated NLP training series. And now we move on to language. For me, this is very exciting because, language is our middle name. Neuro-linguistic programming. A lot of people forget what the linguistic means. Language is, the 7% of communication. It's what we talk about, but it's not what I'm interested in, per se. What I'm interested in this section is the structure of language. And I want to talk to you about the structure of the language that you use to communicate, which quite frankly is going to be a new way of communicating that maybe you haven't even thought of before. That's kind of exciting. It's a brand new way, a brand new idea. It's how do you begin to think about communicating differently? And so I'm going to ask you to think about the structure of language. Page 34 is the first page in the language section. It talks about the conscious use of language. Most of the time, the language we use is unconscious. I mean, think about it. You talk to someone, and you're talking along, blah, 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 blah. And most of the time, people don't bother to stop and think about the words that are coming out of their mouth. So you might say, well, blah, 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 blah. And maybe you notice you didn't quite say it the right way. Well, with your sensory acuity, with all the sensory acuity you've been practicing and the rapport skills that you've got, and now noticing your own submodalities, it's time to begin to think about the language that we use. How do we use language purposefully and in a conscious way, in a way which is conscious and which produces the kind of response that we really want? Now, one of the things that I've done over the years is, and this is something since we just learned perceptual positions in the last program. If you remember perceptual positions, the second position involves going out into the other person and turning back around and looking at yourself as you are doing whatever you're doing. Well, one of the interesting things to do with regards to language is to go out and imagine what the other person has to do to make sense of what it is that you're saying. As you go out, and you might even imagine floating out into the other person's body, turning around and looking toward you, communicating with them, and notice how the communication is being received inside their head. When the receiver, what is the receiver doing inside their head when you say whatever you say? Now, here's the thing. You cannot not affect someone's internal representations. In other words, you must always affect someone else's internal representations when you communicate to them. Every time you talk with someone, whatever you say, you're changing their internal representations. Now, here's the question. How do you do it with volition? How do you do it with consciousness? And that's what we mean when we talk about the conscious use of language. And that's what this entire section is about. The conscious use of language. How do we use language consciously to produce the kind of results that we want to produce? Well, the first thing I think we want to talk about is presuppositions. So let's turn over to page 35. Presuppositions are linguistic assumptions, and they're useful for two things. Presuppositions are simply assumptions. And what does that mean? It means what's assumed by the client's speech. So the first thing that we can do using presuppositions is we can recognize what's assumed by the client's speech. We can listen to a client and we can recognize what they're assuming in the process of speaking to us. Furthermore, we can also use presuppositions to create new internal representations for the client. So presuppositions are extremely powerful and very, very useful for us to create new internal representations for the client. But the key is to make sure that we know what we're doing, to make sure that we affect our client in the way we think we're going to affect them. And that's what presuppositions is all about. So presuppositions is simply taking, the section on presuppositions here, is simply taking the languaging that you normally use and bringing it into your consciousness, making you consciously aware of how do you use language, and then simply bringing it into consciousness so that you can use it in a way which is purposeful, in a way which, quite frankly, produces the kind of results you want to produce. Now, this may seem like a long way around, but I assure you it's absolutely worth taking the time to learn this section, because this will make you a master of NLP and a master of language. And quite frankly, the people who are great communicators in our world are honestly masters of language. They may seem to use it so simply and so offhandedly and so easily that you might think, oh, are they really doing it? But the fact is that they're using language in a way which is very artful and very purposeful. And so the section on presuppositions is for that. And there are 9 that I'd like to look at today, 9 different types of presuppositions. These are the major ones. These are the top 9 of the week. There are, of course, many more kinds of presuppositions, but these are the ones that we usually use in the practitioner training, and they're very, very useful. So there are 9. The first is existence, and the tip-off for existence is the noun. The second one is the possibility and necessity, and the tip-off is modal operators. Modal operators are words that imply possibility or necessity. The third is cause and effect, and the tip-off for cause and effect is the verb to make, which she makes me feel this way, or if-then statements. Number 4, complex equivalence, and the tip-off for complex equivalence is the verb is, or the verb means, as in, she looked at me funny, that means something. Number 5, awareness, the tip-off is verbs, and in this case are verbs with visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. Number 6, presuppositions of time, temporal presuppositions. So any tip-off, any verb tense is a tip-off here. All verbs have a tense. All tense may be past, present, and future, and in any case, that's a presupposition of time. Also, the word stop and other words like now and yet are also really good presuppositions of time. Adjective, adverb presuppositions. An adjective modifies a noun, as you remember. An adverb modifies a verb, and any adverb or adjective is a presupposition. Number 8, inclusive and exclusive ors, and the tip-off is the word or, although there are some inclusives and exclusives which don't have a word or in the middle, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then number 9, ordinal, and ordinal is simply a list. Anytime you hear a list, that's an ordinal presupposition. What I'd like to do is briefly run through these and give you a sense of the difference between all of them and what to look for in each of these. And I'd like to use an example of a presupposition occurring in a sentence and try to keep the sentence the same throughout, pretty much the same throughout. So let's look at number 1, and the presupposition is existence, and the tip-off for a presupposition of existence is a noun. Here's an example. John realized there was a mountain behind the house. Here's another example. John just realized there was a mountain behind the house. And another example. John didn't realize there was a mountain behind the house. What's interesting is that every time I say one of those, in each of those, you had to accept the idea of a mountain behind the house. And no matter how I structure the sentence, in fact, John was so silly that he didn't realize there was a mountain behind the house, even though he'd looked at it every day for 12 years. No matter how I structure the sentence, you still have to accept the presupposition that there's a mountain behind the house. Now you can say, hey, I don't believe you, but more than likely, we'll be able to shift your attention to John rather than to the mountain behind the house. And what that does is it displaces resistance. It's really interesting to be able to displace resistance. Now notice that by making sense out of all the sentences that were uttered there, that in the examples that I used, you had to make an internal representation of a mountain behind the house. Now, that's the basis of presupposition. It's the power for the speaker of being able to assist the client in structuring an order and sequence of internal representations and putting them in a certain order. And that's the basis of all presupposition work in NLP. The question is, how do you structure those presuppositions in order to make change? And that's really what this section is all about. I want you to really understand this next sentence I'm about to say. Whether or not the sentence is positive or negative in nature, the effect of the presupposition is still the same. I'll say that again. Whether or not the sentence that I use is positive or negative in nature, the effect of the presupposition is still exactly the same. The power of presuppositions becomes because the question is, what is it that the person has to do to make sense out of this sentence? And in making sense out of the sentence, the person has to accept certain presuppositions. Now imagine being able to change someone's ideas. Imagine being able to change someone's thinking. Imagine being able to change someone's objections, for example, if they're objecting to something you're saying, simply out of the use of presuppositions that are inherent in your speech. And while the client wrestles with making sense out of the sentence, he or she is accepting the presuppositions. And that's the basis of how we use language and how we use presuppositions in NLP. Now notice how much more powerful your presuppositions become. For example, if you're a car dealer and you say, and by the way, I had a car dealer say this once to me and I bought the car. He said, don't test drive that car unless you want to buy it. Whoa. And I got in the car and guess what I wanted to do by the time I test drove it? while I wanted to buy it. That's the power of presuppositions. And here's another one. If you're a hypnotherapist and you say to a client, don't sit in that chair unless you want to go into trance. Or don't come in to see me unless you're ready to change now. Really powerful presuppositional structures, which if the client accepts the presuppositions at the unconscious level, they're going to change, or they're going to make the changes necessary. So if a salesman had a customer who had a list of objections, the salesman could say to the customer, what is the one question you need to ask that would cause you to want this product totally and completely now? So the power of setting a presuppositional structure up front that the unconscious mind has to accept the presuppositions inherent in the statement in order to make sense out of the question is a very, very powerful set of constructions and very, very useful for making changes with clients. So let's go back to the presupposition of existence now, page 35. The tip-off for presuppositions of existence is nouns, and the example, John just realized there was a mountain behind the house. Okay, next is presuppositions of possibility and necessity. Possibility and necessity, and those are modal operators. A modal operator is a word like should, shouldn't, have to, must, it's possible, can, etc., that talk about possibility or necessity. Here's an example. John realized how easy it was to climb the mountain behind the house. By now he should have realized it because it had been there a long time. By now he should have realized it. Of course, the word should is a modal operator. And we've also included the possibility of climbing the mountain. And the possibility, the presupposition of possibility will tell you whether or not the client believes something is possible. Whether or not the client believes something is possible. If I had said it's possible to climb the mountain behind the house, you might say, you're nuts. You're crazy. But if I said John realized that it was possible to climb the mountain behind the house, by now he should have, because it had been there for so long, it's probably going to displace the resistance, and the question of whether or not it's possible is probably going to be totally bypassed by that sentence. Okay, number 3, cause and effect. The tip-off for cause and effect is the verb to make, and implied causatives, which are of a structure of if-then. Here's an example. It was the brilliant flash of lightning last night that caused John to realize there was a mountain behind the house. Of course, the brilliant flash of lightning that caused John to realize is the presupposition of cause and effect. We could just as well have used a presupposition that said the lightning flash made John see the mountain behind the house, and of course that is also a cause and effect presupposition. Here are some other cause and effect presuppositions that I think are quite powerful, and I think these are good examples to look at. So what happens if I say to a client when he walks in the office, don't go into a trance right away because I really need to talk to your conscious mind. Now that's fun, isn't it? Or we could say, don't sit in this chair because it's the trance chair, and I really need to talk to you consciously. Both of those are cause and effect presuppositions. Now, we could even state it in past tense. We could say, oh, no, you sat in the trance chair and I wanted to talk to you before you went into a trance. Those are all quite interesting and quite fun. Here's another example. Tonight when you sleep, you may dream. And that will cause all of the things you've learned so far by listening to these programs to totally and completely at the unconscious level integrate themselves while you sleep tonight. Now, by the way, that may not happen necessarily. But notice that your unconscious mind accepts the presuppositions inherent if it does. And if it does accept it, it says, okay, I've got it. I'll go in and rearrange everything and it'll work. You'll have it by tomorrow morning. No problem. It's happy to do that. And by the way, your unconscious mind loves to please you. Another example, by the way, is the way that hypnotherapists use the progressive signs of trance to deepen a trance. All of this is a series of cause and effect presuppositions. So a lesser level of trance and effect, or a lesser trance, for example, a phenomenon, might also build on top of that and build on top of that and build on top of that, so that each trance phenomenon that's produced deepens the trance, and each one of those, of course, is cause and effect, isn't it? Another example, and I think this is another major issue for therapeutic interaction between a client and an NLP practitioner. Every example, every time a client comes in and talks to you, it's a cause and effect violation, because the client comes into you and says, I'm at the effect of a certain cause over which I have no control. Now, do you accept the presupposition of cause and effect, or do you change it? Of course, I change it. I work with the client in making that kind of change with the client so that the client realizes that he or she is at cause of each and every one of their experiences and also is in charge of their life. Okay, enough of cause and effect. Let's move on to complex equivalence. The tip-off for complex equivalence is any iteration of the verb to be, and that includes the verb is, that as in, he is looking at me funny. That means, and of course the word means is also another complex equivalence tip-off. That means he doesn't like me. It's similar to cause and effect, but it's different. So let's look at the difference between cause and effect and complex equivalence. Cause and effect, which we covered a moment ago, is one after the other. It's sequential. A cause in time then causes a certain effect which happens later in time. Complex equivalence, both things happen at the same time. It's almost as if they were two things separated by an equals sign. And in terms of time, they're both happening at exactly the same time. Now, here's our example with the mountain. John's inquisitive nature means that, of course, he would know that there's a mountain behind the house. Okay, number 5, and that's presuppositions of awareness. Now, a lot of what we've talked about, of course, have had presuppositions of awareness in them. But the tip-off for a presupposition of awareness is any verb with visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. So, to see, to hear, to feel, to taste, to smell. Those are all presuppositions of awareness. John could see the mountain. John could hear the rumbling from the mountain. John could feel the rumbling from the mountain. John could smell the mountain. John could taste the mountain. Those are all presuppositions of awareness. And in essence, there are other words too, which in essence will also assist a client in becoming aware of certain things. So John realized there was a mountain behind the house. John became aware there was a mountain behind the house. Perhaps we could even say John didn't realize there was a mountain behind the house. Those are all presuppositions of awareness. Okay, next, presuppositions of time, temporal presuppositions. And the tip-off is verb tense, as I mentioned before. Also the words stop and now and yet. These are very, very important. One of the things that for me, that I use presuppositions of time for, is to take a resource the client may have had in the past and bring it forward to the present and to the future, or to take something in the future when they're done with a problem and bring it back into the past. And those are fun things to do. Here, look what happens if you say to a client, you know that old problem that you had, that you used to have, do you still have it now? Well, of course, that's not the way to do it. You want to do it in the opposite direction. So a client comes in and says, I'm tense. You can say, is that present tense or past tense? Of course, the client, you're of course moving it into the past and asking the client to take the tenseness and put it in the past. Here's something else you could say. What is the problem which you have now? Which, when you think of the person you've always wanted to be, that someday you said you'd be, that you could be that kind of person now, aren't you? When you think of who you said you'd be someday, now, wasn't that worth waiting for now that you are? And the problems that you used to have, you can just forget about them as you realize that you are now the person that you always said you wanted to be, and you can be, and you are now. So that's taking something from the future and bringing it back into the past, and then taking and putting further back into the past the problems that they used to have. Verb tense is also very important, as I mentioned. We could say, a client says, I have a problem. You could say, what was the problem? Now, you don't want to say, what is the problem? Or what is the problem that you are having now? But you say, what was the problem? So let's play for a moment. You want to play? This is kind of fun. Think of a problem that you had. Think of a problem you were having, but what do you have now? Now think of the way you felt. Now, how are you feeling? Notice the difference. The word feeling implies, the ing implies ongoingness. So the ing ending usually takes and makes a movie into a verb or moves, puts it into ongoingness. Whereas an ed ending, like what was it that you had, tends to put it in the past. Extratemporal words, which are also fun, are words like now. And we'd say, could you please just stop now? Or I like the word stop too. You could say, if you would just stop and consider the following. This actually sets up a stop in the brain. So when you say to someone, could you please stop? That's what they usually do. They usually stop what they're doing, including thinking. By the way to use stop is to say stop and then ask them to do something else. So stop is a really powerful, powerful temporal word. All right, let's look at number 7, adjective-adverb presuppositions. You remember from 9th grade grammar. I actually went back and got a 9th grade grammar book and looked this up for just for fun, because I always say 9th grade grammar, but it really is in the 9th grade grammar book. An adjective modifies a noun, and an adverb modifies a verb. So any adverb or adjective presupposes something. John didn't realize how easy it was to climb the mountain. Now, in this case, the word easy modifies the verb to climb, which is an adverb modifier, the verb easy. And John just realized it was easy to climb such a small mountain. Those are 2 examples of adjective and adverb presuppositions, which change it in essence. And what it does is it diverts attention and bypasses resistance. Number 8. Now, number 8 is an inclusive and exclusive or. Inclusive or exclusive and inclusive or. And we've grouped them together here. I think that in each case, an exclusive or excludes some things, and an inclusive or includes some other things. But no matter what, the word or does exclude and include certain things. So the construction is essentially you want to give the client the illusion of choice. You want to give the client the illusion of choice. John couldn't decide whether to climb the mountain now or at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. In which case, we've given the illusion of, in either case, John's going to climb the mountain. The illusion is, does he climb it now or does he climb it at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? It's fun if you have children, but you only get to use this once or twice usually because the kids will catch on. You can say, do you want to go to bed at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock tonight? And they'll go, 9. Okay, great. 9's fine, whatever you say. Let's do it if that's what you want to do. Well, after a while, the child will wake up if you use it too many times and they'll go, neither, Dad, I don't want to do either one. So it's either way. This is the basis of double binds. And double binds, I think Erickson summed it up the best. Milton Erickson said, I think my clients ought to have the illusion of choice while they do exactly what it is that I'm suggesting that they do. A double bind is also the basis for construction for an alternative choice question in selling. If you've listened to any Tommy Hopkins or before him, J. Douglas Edwards, you'll remember that an exclusive or an alternative choice question is generally used to set up a buying condition. And so you'd say, would you like it in blue or red? Would you like the large one or the medium-sized one? Would you like it delivered today or can we deliver it tomorrow afternoon? If you're making an appointment, you'd say, would you like to meet this afternoon at 2:30 or would 3:30 be better? These are all situations that give the client the illusion of choice. And I think his point of view was great. If we give the client the illusion of choice, it allows him to respond in whatever way is best for him. He can respond in whatever way is best, and it also avoids us seeming as though we were authoritarian. Okay, finally, ordinal. And ordinal is, the tip-off here is a list. Anytime we have a list, like first, second, third, fourth, the second thing that happened was that John realized there was a mountain behind the house. Notice also that this implies that there was a first thing. So all of these presuppositions, now let's go on and look at page 36. All of these presuppositions will allow us now to begin to recognize the presence of presuppositions in sentences. So let's look at page 36 and see, for example, just exactly which ones of these are presuppositions and which ones of these are mind reads. So here's what we're going to do. So the first question, and by the way, these statements are statements that have come to us from clients. So these are actually client statements, as unfortunate as some of them might be. These are actual client statements that we've received or that different therapists have had from clients. Okay, so the first one is, I'm not sure whether or not I should stop beating my wife. A, he has a wife. Now, what the idea here is that you're going to answer either P for presupposition or M, R for mind read, and go down and fill in the blank. So let's do this first one together. And here's the tip-off, by the way. You might want to make note here on page 36. The way you can tell that a presupposition is present is you can tell that a presupposition is present because the word appears in the sentence. Now, there are some presuppositions which are implied. But let's go through the tapes and see which is which here. And I want to tell you in advance that some of these are quite close. Okay, so the number one, I'm not sure whether or not I should stop beating my wife. So A, he has a wife. What is that? Well, if you said that it's a presupposition, that's correct, because, of course, the word wife appears in the sentence. B, he loves his wife. What's that? If you said presupposition, that wouldn't be correct because the word loves is not in the sentence. So in this case, number B is mind read. C, he currently beats his wife. Which is that, a presupposition or a mind read? Well, yes, it is a presupposition because he says, I'm not sure if I should stop beating my wife. So in that sense, the word beating is in the sentence, and so that's a presupposition. And number D, he's a low-life slob who should be shot. Yes, that is a mind read. It is a mind read, but it's also true. Okay, so why don't you stop the tape now and go through and do the rest of these. Ask yourself, read the sentence, and then ask yourself, is this a presupposition or a mind read? And then turn the tape back on and we'll continue. Okay, welcome back. And let's look at number 2. Number 2 is, I don't see why I can't do it. All my friends are doing it. So A, he feels he's being treated unfairly, is a mind read. B, he wants to be liked by his friends. What did you put there? Right, well, that's a mind read. And number C, this person's friends do something he doesn't do. That's a presupposition. All my friends are doing it. And number D, all his friends are bums who should be shot. And of course, that's a mind read. Okay, number 3, if I don't learn how to communicate with my boss, I won't get a raise. A, he feels like he's being treated unfairly. That's a mind read. B, he doesn't know how to communicate with his boss. That's a presupposition. C, now C, I want you to know that my feeling is C could go either way, and I could argue it either way. But if we're going to stick with the idea that the presupposition should be in the sentence, then technically number C is a mind read. Now, in actuality, he wants to learn new behaviors. We could assume that he wants a raise. If we assume that he wants a raise, then it could be a presupposition. But technically, we probably should put mind read down there. And number D, his salary is connected to his communication skills. Well, of course, it's connected through the if-then statement. In this case, there's an if without a then, but it still is, in essence, an if-then statement. And, of course, then that's a presupposition. Number 4, I have to set up unrealistic expectations. A, he can't stop making unrealistic expectations as a presupposition. B, he feels trapped. What did you put there? Yeah, that's a mind read, right? And number C, he has expectations. Well, I think either expectations, either realistic or unrealistic, certainly that's a presupposition because he does have expectations. And number D, he knows when he's being unrealistic. I think he does know that he's being unrealistic. Well, that's why he called them unrealistic expectations. So that's also a presupposition. If we had said he knows he has expectations, that probably would have been a mind read. Okay, number 5, I'm feeling much better now. I can see how some of the things I was doing just made me unhappy. A, some behavior he engaged in was related to some internal state, which that's a presupposition. B, and the relationship is, I'm feeling much better now. I can see how some of the things I was doing just made me unhappy. And again, the relationship is the cause and effect. Number B, he has feelings. Of course, he said, I'm feeling much better now. That's presupposition. C, he has much more control over his life now. That's a mind read. And number D, he fixed himself, so he shouldn't be shot. And oftentimes we joke about this one in our little branch of NLP. So you may hear me say from time to time, if you come and take a training, oh, I fixed myself, so there's no need to shoot me. That's a little joke that we have, and that comes from that page. Isn't that fun? Okay, page 37. Let's go on and look at some other presuppositions. I want you to get 2 things here, if you would, please. I'd like you to get the major presuppositions. That is, what are the major presuppositions inherent in this entire sentence? And then I'd like to look at some of the minor presuppositions, the existence and so forth. So let's look at number 1. So first of all, let's get the major presupposition here. If the cat meows again, I'll have to put him outside. So the major presupposition, there are actually, I like 2 of them for the major ones. You could have selected either, if you've looked at this for a moment, you could have selected either cause and effect, which is if the cat meows again, implied, then I'll have to put him outside, cause and effect presupposition. Or I also like the word again, which is a presupposition of time. And of course, that is if the cat meows again, I'll have to put him outside. Now let's see who else or what else is presupposed in this sentence. Well, first of all, there's the existence of cat. We began with the if, and there's also an implied then there, so that's a cause and effect presupposition. The word cat is a presupposition of existence, and then I'll have to put him outside, which implies the existence of an outside. Now, here's the question. The question I want to ask you is, and we're gonna this is a fun question. I want you to think about this. Is the cat, and I want you to be prepared to answer this when you come to the training, is the cat male or female? Think about it, and I'll answer the question when you get to the training. Okay, welcome back, and let's look at sentence number 2. It was her friendly smile that made me walk up and say hi. What's the major construction there? Well, if you said the major construction is cause and effect, you'd be correct. And the verb to make. It was her friendly smile that made me walk up and say hi. So that's a cause and effect presupposition. What else is present? Let's see. Past tense. So there's a temporal presupposition there. It was her friendly smile. We'd like to know what that means. That could be, we could ask ourselves, what does that mean by friendly smile? That made me walk up and say hi. The capability of walking. Those are all presuppositions. But the primary one here that's present is a cause and effect presupposition. Okay, number 3, if only he'd come home on time, the party wouldn't have gotten out of control. Only, you might think, gosh, this is a pretty good exclusive, but it's actually another cause and effect presupposition. If he had come home on time, then implied the party wouldn't have gotten out of control. I think we do want to know a couple things. We'd like to know what is meant by on time, what's the meaning of out of control. Of course, the existence of he, the existence of party, the out of control, what does that mean? That's sort of almost a nominalization. We'd like to know what that means. But the major construction, once again, is cause and effect. Number 4, people have always given me more to do than I can handle. I like this sentence. It's a really interesting sentence. By the way, this is a client utterance, and it's really an interesting question. It's really an interesting statement. People have always given me more to do than I can handle. What do you think? I think it's a temporal. I think it's one of time. Always. People have always given me more to do than I can handle. You know what that means? That means if I was talking to this person, let's say it's a he, if I was talking to him and I was at his desk and his entire desk was empty and I put one small task on his desk, he would probably say, oh, that's more than I can handle. That's too much. So always in this case is a temporal presupposition. I think we also, we got the existence of people. We've got the existence of those things which are given to him, implied there. And they're more than he can handle, which is an adjective adverb presupposition. All of those are important, but I think the key presupposition in this one is time. Number 5, his easygoing personality is good PR for our company. And of course, that's a complex equivalence. The verb is in the middle really stands out in this one, and that's probably the most important part of the sentence. Easygoing personality, I'd like to know easygoing, modifying personality. Good PR for our company. Good modifying PR, that's an adjective. Easygoing, modifying personality, also another adjective. For our company, we'd like existence of company. But again, the complex equivalence is probably the most important part of this sentence. Number 6, stop watching over your shoulder. Now, that's not a presupposition of time. You get it? Stop watch over your shoulder. Yeah. Well, if you got to explain them, they're not that funny. Okay, so stop watching over your shoulder. There is a presupposition of time, which is the word stop. Not necessarily the stop watching, but stop. But I like the awareness here. I like the presupposition of awareness, which is watching. Remember we said the verb to see, to hear, to feel, to taste, to smell. Those are all presuppositions of awareness. And the issue here is the watching. Of course, we've got the existence of shoulder. We've got the existence of something to watch. But the fact is that the presupposition is of awareness that's present there. Okay, number 7, only you can learn this. What do we have here? Well, I like the exclusive in the only. That's an exclusive or without an or. And we said when we were talking about exclusive ors that you could have an exclusive or without an or. Well, this is it. This is the exclusive or with no or present. In this case, so the word only sets us up for the exclusive or. The existence of you is a presupposition of existence, and the existence of something to learn, and the possibility of learning, or the awareness that could be possible through the learning. All of those are presuppositions, but again, I like the exclusive in this case. Number 8, either she goes to the store or I do, and obviously this is an exclusive or or an inclusive or, probably an exclusive or. And either she's going to go or I'm going to go. And the way you tell an exclusive or is usually the consideration is mostly that it's digital. So either she or I, we're not including a lot of other choices. Either she goes to the store or I do. So we've got the existence of she and I, and we've got the existence of store. But the primary presupposition here is the exclusive. Number 9, first the winds came, then the rain. And that's what is that anyway? What is that? You might think that it was a cause and effect, but it wasn't really. Because even though you have a then, you have no if. And actually the winds don't necessarily cause the rain anyway. So it is an ordinal. First the winds came, then the rain. The ordinal is the word first. We have existence of wind, existence of rain, and still I like the ordinal the best. And then finally, number 10, opera makes me want to cry. By the way, this is true, and not in a good way. Opera makes me want to cry is a cause and effect because of the verb to make. We have the existence of opera, the existence of eyes, the implied existence of eyes, and the existence of tears. Oh my! But really, it's opera makes me want to cry is the primary cause and effect that's present there. Okay, so that's our tour de force of presuppositions. And if you want to rewind that again and study it, it'll really repay the amount of time that you spend in looking at that, because it's really, really a powerful set of presuppositions. And it'll allow you to structure your language in ways that will make a major difference for people. Now, the next thing we need to look at is the level of abstraction or specificity of our ideas. So we can move our thinking, and you can move your thinking, in a range from abstract all the way to specific. You can get very abstract or very specific. And let's look at page 39 for an example. The hierarchy of ideas is really an easy way to learn language, and really an easy way to learn the difference between abstract and specific. So let me begin by giving you an example, and we're going to talk about 2 different directions in which one could think, or in which one could speak. Chunking down, that's a technical term. It simply means getting more specific. It simply means moving more toward the specific. That's on the bottom left-hand side of your diagram there on page 39. Chunking up means moving more toward the abstract, and that's on the upper left-hand side of your diagram there on page 39 on the hierarchy of ideas. Now, if I move a person, if together we move more toward the details and we get more specific, that brings a person out of trance. If I move in the opposite direction, notice at the top of the page it says in trance. And that has to do with an intuitor, which sensor and intuitor are Myers-Briggs categories, and we talk about that in the master track. And that's a big picture person. And we may use the Milton model to get there. Now, so let's say we're going to go to a higher level of abstraction from cars. And chunking up is often not quite as intuitive for some people, so let me give you some questions you could ask yourself. And that's right underneath the upward arrow on the left-hand side. And the questions you could ask yourself is, what is this an example of? Or you could ask yourself, for what purpose? Or you could ask yourself, what is your intention? So let's see what we get. Let's see what we get if we ask ourselves one of these 3 questions as we chunk up. So let's see, cars. What are cars an example of? And cars, of course, are an example of transportation. And what is transportation an example of? And transportation is an example of movement. And what is movement an example of? And movement, of course, and this is a rather large leap for those of you who are logical levels fans. This is a rather large leap. A large leap to existence. Movement is an example of existence because in order to move, you must first exist. If I'd had more room on the paper, I probably could have put some more words in there, but it looked as though we were rather running out of room, so we just jumped right up to existence. Now notice, no matter how many times you have to chunk up, no matter how many times you have to go up to a higher level of abstraction, that eventually you end in existence, or you end up in all that there is. This is why the hierarchy of ideas is so useful. So you can begin to talk about an issue all the way from very specific to very abstract. And let me tell you why you'd want to do this. This is so important. I can tell you a couple of different stories. And the admiral called him on the phone and said, that's not what I wanted. What are the conditions of the troops? What's the readiness? So notice that the general had wanted something that was rather abstract or big picture. Notice that the admiral had wanted something that was quite detailed, something that was more into the specifics. If you know what kind of detail or what level of detail that the person you're communicating to needs, you'll be able to communicate exactly the right thing at the right time. By the way, this is also useful in negotiation, because negotiation essentially is the process of gaining agreement. Now, what's the process of gaining agreement? Well, if you look at the issue of chunking up on the upper left-hand side in the chart, it says chunking up, and right under that it says agreement. Agreement is impossible if you're chunking down. That is, if you go more and more into details and distinctions, it becomes less and less possible to gain agreement. I'm not saying it's totally impossible, but it becomes less and less possible as you chunk down, and more possible as you chunk up. Here's an example from my own experience, and I, by the way, have done a lot of negotiation over the years, and one of the most fun ones, we were working with a business in California, and there were two owners, and the owner said, we want you to come and do our business planning with us. We really want you to help us and do business planning. We said, okay, so we'll come and do business planning. And they said, but how are you going to get us to agree on what the plan is? And I said, well, we have a pretty good system. We call it the hierarchy of ideas. It'll help us get pretty well clear on what we want. He said, well, I just don't believe it's possible. He said, if you don't get us to agreement, we're not going to use you in terms of doing your business planning. So we said, okay, but we were so sure we could do it. And we simply asked him one question. We said, what are you in business for? What's the purpose of being in business? And we asked that question, so what purpose? We asked the question for what purpose? What's the purpose for being in business? What are you in business for? And he said, well, this, and we eventually got to making a profit. So we said, so no matter how you make a profit, no matter what we do to make a profit, that's fine. He said, yes. Then we asked the other person, what are you in business for? And of course, the answer is to make a profit. If we focus on the higher intent, if we focus on the higher intention, which is the next question, the third question, then agreement becomes very, very easy. And the hierarchy of ideas is it's a very, very simple model that will allow you to chunk up and down and allow you to be the master of whatever level you need to communicate at. Now think about it for a moment. Master communicators of all time have been able to control the level of communication, whether you chunk up and get very abstract or whether you chunk down and get very, very specific. Now in mediation, and this is right under those questions, you want to chunk up until you get to an agreement. You get to some sort of agreement. You're going to chunk up until you get to the level of nominalization. And let me explain that. Nominalization is a word we're going to run into when we get to the Milton model and when we get to the meta model. And nominalization is a word that you can't put in a wheelbarrow. It's a word that acts like a noun, but it's a word that you can't put in a wheelbarrow. So let me give you an example from our chart here on page 39. A car, although it's rather big, a car you could put in a wheelbarrow. If you got a crane and lifted the car up, you could put the car into a wheelbarrow. You could put a Pontiac into a wheelbarrow. You could put a Fiero into a wheelbarrow. You could put a GT into a wheelbarrow. You could put wheels and doors and hubcaps and lug nuts. All of those could go into a wheelbarrow. But the minute we get above the level of car, we move into the level called transportation. And transportation is a noun, but it's not specific enough. It's not specific. We wouldn't put transportation in a wheelbarrow. We certainly wouldn't put movement in a wheelbarrow. And I suppose if a wheelbarrow was big enough, we could put all of existence in there, but typically we wouldn't. So in this case, we're moving into the level transportation and movement are certainly nominalizations. And a nominalization is a noun, which is a whole abstract concept. It's actually a verb that's been turned into a noun. Technically what happens is, so for example, take the word communication. Communication is the process of communicating. Transportation is the process of transporting. Movement is the process of moving. But we turn them into nouns so that we can talk about them. And we can talk about them in terms of what they do. So in this sense, the word transportation is a nominalization. So when you're doing mediation or negotiation, you want to chunk up till you get to the highest level nominalization. And then, and which is kind of fun, and then you only chunk back down as quickly as you can maintain agreement. And we talk about this technique as a negotiation technique actually in our master practitioner training. And it's a very, very simple technique to do. Very, very simple technique to do. Let's talk a little bit about intuition. Actually, Carl Jung, who was one of the three fathers of psychology, said that intuition was simply the ability to chunk up. He didn't use the word chunk up, but to chunk up and find connections and relationships, and then to chunk back down and to relate them to the current situation. It's rare, by the way, to find someone who's a large chunker or a big picture person who sorts for information. People who sort for information are usually smaller chunkers. Now, if you have a problem going more toward the specific, let's say that people have accused you over the years of being too big picture or too flaky or too out there or too airheaded, you could use these questions to assist you in chunking down. You could use, for example, what are examples of this, or what specifically. You could also use any meta-model question. Any one of these is really, really useful to assist you in chunking down. So what the hierarchy of ideas says is that we can talk about anything. We can talk about anything in life, and we can talk about it from a level of abstract, like existence or movement or transportation, all the way down to something very, very, very specific. Now, the structure of nitpicking, which is underneath the examples of classes and categories, right underneath parts and all the way down under lug nuts. The example of nitpicking, the structure of nitpicking is chunking down and mismatching. So a nitpicker is going to go more toward details, and then they're going to mismatch the details you've just given them. Let me give you an example of that. We were in California, again, talking to another gentleman, and he said, and we were actually going to ask him to hire us as business consultants, and he said, so, what are you going to do? What are you going to do for me? How many times am I going to see you each month? How many reports are you going to write? What are we going to do specifically? Are you going to help us? How many ads are you going to help us write a month? And so forth and so on. And I thought about it for a moment, and I thought, look, if I give this guy a whole lot of information, if I don't give him the kind of information he wants, he's going to mismatch me. So I said to him, before I answer your question, I said, let me just ask you one question. If we were to make you profitable, would it matter how we did it? Would it matter if we had one meeting a week or one meeting a year? And he said, no, it really wouldn't matter as long as you put us in the black. And I said, okay. And we went on and we talked about what we were talking about, and I actually never needed to answer his question after that. But the fact is, if you get someone who wants to chunk down and nitpick you, you're better off to avoid that and chunk them back up to a higher level where you can still maintain agreement. Okay, one more thought on this hierarchy of ideas, and that's the structure of overwhelm. The structure of overwhelm usually means that the person you're working with has too big of a chunk. Usually the person who's overwhelmed, it's so funny because you walk in, you talk to somebody and they say, I'm totally overwhelmed. And you say, what are you overwhelmed about? And they say, everything. And you go, everything? And they go, yeah. Well, what specifically? Why don't you make a list of what specifically you're overwhelmed about? And you know what? Usually most people can't get overwhelmed about more than 10 or 15 units. If you have somebody make a list, you probably won't find more than 12, 15. At the most, I had one client come up with 20, who was overwhelmed, come up with 21 units, 21 different things they were overwhelmed about. Usually the structure of overwhelm is that the person thinks, oh, I'm just overwhelmed about everything. Everything is getting at me. And they begin to lump that into everything is going on, everything's overwhelming me. So if you want to do that, you just chunk them down. So you say, what specifically, that's the question on the lower left-hand side, what specifically are you overwhelmed about? And when you chunk them back down, you move them down to a point where they begin to see that they're not overwhelmed about everything. They're not overwhelmed about everything. They're only overwhelmed about some things specifically. Now, here's what I'd like to suggest that you do with the hierarchy of ideas. I'd like to suggest that over the next few days and weeks, with the hierarchy of ideas, I'd like to suggest that you take the time to really exercise your brain. I'll bet you that you either chunk up best or that you chunk down the best. Now, there's also lateral chunking, which we haven't talked about, but let me talk about that for a moment. And this, I think this will probably exercise your brain too. Lateral chunking means going in a different direction. We didn't talk about buses and boats and cars and planes and trains here on page 39, but those are lateral chunks to cars. Now, let's just say that we were in some city, like the city of Honolulu, and we had a transportation problem. That is, there were too many cars on the highways. Sound familiar? So what are the solutions? The solutions would be other forms of transportation. Buses, boats, cars, planes, or trains. How do you get to there? Well, and this isn't in your notes, but here's the way you do it. You actually chunk up one level, and then you ask yourself, what are other examples of this? So let me see how this would work. Cars for what purpose? Well, for the purpose of transportation. Or cars, what are cars an example of? Cars are an example of transportation. Good. Now, what are other examples of transportation? And you would say buses, boats, planes, trains, skateboards, rollerblades, bicycles, etc. So by chunking up one level or going more toward the abstract and then coming back down, we can actually do a process called lateral thinking. Now, Edward de Bono has run seminars on lateral thinking for years and years and years and years, and I don't know anyone who's taken one of his seminars that actually got the specific technique for chunking laterally. Well, this is the specific technique for chunking laterally. You chunk up one level, and then you ask yourself, what are other examples of this? And then you come back down to the same level, but you look at other examples. Now, this, I think, should exercise your brain. We've given you now 3 ways to chunk. Chunking up, chunking down, and chunking laterally. What I would suggest, and this was kind of fun, I worked with a woman who said to me, I'm dyslexic, not me, but her. And I said to her, well, how do you know you're dyslexic? And she said, I was in college and I only got A's and B's. And she said, I wanted to get all A's. And I went, oh, poor thing. I said, I know a lot of people that didn't even graduate from college. Well, she said, I had to work really, really hard. And I said, poor thing, so did I. Well, she said, I'll tell you what. I know I'm dyslexic because if you gave me a map of the city, I couldn't find my way across the city. Now, that's a problem. To me, that's a problem. So I said, great. So how would you know if you weren't dyslexic anymore? And she said, I could take a kid's puzzle. I could take a kid's puzzle and I could put it together in less than 30 minutes. And she said, I can't do that today. I can't take a kid's puzzle and put it together in less than 30 minutes. So by talking to her, I observed that her problem was in chunking up. She got lost in the trees. She couldn't see the entire forest for the trees. The reason why she couldn't find her way across town is because she'd look at a map and she'd get so involved in the details of the map that she'd lose sight of where she was. So her whole problem was in chunking. So I said to her, for the next week, I'd like you to chunk up a little bit. I'd like you to ask yourself the question, with every thought that you have, I'd like to ask yourself the question, what is this an example of? Or, for what purpose? Or, what is your intention? I'd like you to ask that 3 or 4 times. And if you have nothing else to do, I'd like you to ask it at least 5 or 6 times, or maybe even 10 times, until you arrive at existence each time. So she did it for 2 weeks, came back at the end of 2 weeks, and she walked in the office and sat down, and I said, how are you doing? She said, I've been doing the homework faithfully, and at the end of the time, I just gave her a puzzle. I just gave her a kid's puzzle. I had one of the staff go out and buy a kid's puzzle. She got the kid's puzzle, and she put it together in 10 minutes. And I said, that's it, you're done. And she said, done? What do you mean I'm done? And she said, what do you mean I'm done? I said, well, as long as you can chunk up and maintain an overview of the big picture, you're in great shape. You're totally in great shape as long as you can chunk up and maintain an overview of the big picture. And she went, whoa, that's really a trip. Well, I got word back from her. She actually went back to school, got her master's degree, did very well at it. And all it was a problem of chunking. So oftentimes dyslexia, especially in adults, may also be a chunking problem. And you need to find that out if you have a client who says, oh, I've got dyslexia, or I can't see the forest for the trees. Chunking up is really, really a good process for them to learn. Now let me mention one other thing, why you might want to learn this. And I think this is really important. If you look at where it says in the upper right-hand corner where it says big picture, and you look at the bottom right-hand corner and it says details, I think the interesting thing is there's more power in an abstract idea because an abstract idea actually controls a concrete idea. There's also more value in an abstract idea. In fact, the greater the level of abstraction, the greater the level of value. And in many cases, and I'm sure you've heard it said, that the most profound ideas are the simplest ideas. Well, simplicity comes in being able to see the big picture. There's also more value in it too, because in our world that we live in today, we get compensated for our ability to handle levels of complex, uncertain, and ambiguous information. It's been researched, by the way, that if you have the ability to handle complex, uncertain, and ambiguous information, it will definitely improve your ability to age. But from the point of view of compensation in business, think about this for just a minute. The person in the mailroom, the clerk in the mailroom, handles lots of things. He does lots of stuff. He's doing, handling specific details of mailing every day. Lots of details. As you progress up the corporate ladder, your income increases based on your ability to hold the big picture. To where, by the time a person becomes a CEO or a chief executive, their entire job is tied up in conceptualization. The entire job of the CEO is tied up in having to make conceptual ideas, being able to conceive of new ideas, being able to conceive of things, being able to conceive of big ideas, big picture things, and to get an idea of where the corporation's going. So here's another example in the military. Who handles more things, or who does more? The private, who's working and doing very specific stuff, or the general officer? Well, obviously it's the private. The general officer does almost, from the point of view of the private, the general officer does almost nothing. It's mostly a conceptualization job. So as we move up the corporate ladder, both in business, in education, also in corporate and in the military, generally the more work you do, the less you get paid, and the greater your ability to concept, or the greater your ability to conceptualize certain things, the more you'll get paid. Now, there's one exception to this. And I had somebody ask me one time, he heard my talk on this, and he said, well, listen, Tad, he said, I'm a PhD, and I make next to nothing. And of course, the problem is the PhD philosopher starts in the abstract and stays in the abstract. So I think that you also need to have the ability to move through the entire range fully and completely. Be able to move up and down, to be able to chunk at will, to be able to move to the high level of the biggest picture and move to the details all the way down to the details. If you feel you need more help learning how to get specific, ask yourself, what are examples of this? Using the example in the hierarchy of ideas on page 39, chunk up in your mind and chunk back down. Use other examples. Take, for example, art, A-R-T. Take art. What are examples of art? And chunk up and chunk down. What are examples of art? What is art an example of? Do you find you end up in the same place as existence? Do you find you end up in the same place as movement even? Does art have movement? These are all questions which, as you go through the entire process of chunking up and chunking down, what you'll do is you'll exercise your brain and you'll gain greater chunking muscle. We'll actually exercise the chunking muscle of your brain. We'll begin to exercise the chunking muscle of your brain, and your brain will become stronger, and you'll be able to leap logical levels laughingly. I got to tell you one final story. This is almost embarrassing. I hate to say this, but one day I ran into a fella. I was in the old days when TWA used to have automatic upgrades. I walked into the TWA office in Honolulu. I was checking in to go somewhere, I think to the mainland, and I said, I'd like to. Here's my upgrade, and they said, sorry, Mr. James, there's no room for upgrades, and I was quite tired, and I really wanted. It was an overnight flight, and I really needed to sleep. And so I said, let me talk to the head person here in the Honolulu airport of TWA. So they brought him out, and he came out. And he said, listen, Dr. James, he said, I'm really sorry, we just don't have that class of seat available to you. And I said to him, well, don't you want happy, satisfied customers overall flying your airlines? And he said to me, Dr. James, he said, we're going to stay more specific than that today. And I went, whoa. Here's a guy that's been trained in linguistics. And I figured I'd met my match. And so I took my coat and went back into coach and slept as best I could sitting up. So the hierarchy of ideas is fun. It's a fun thing. And when you get to the training, we're going to have a great exercise on it. And I think you'll love it. It's a lot of fun. Practice it. Practice chunking up. Practice chunking down. I think you'll enjoy it. It's one of the most fun things for me. And as you use it, you'll gain more and more capability, and soon they'll call you a master of language. All right, well, we're going to move on now. Thanks for joining us for program number 7. As we move into program number 8, we're going to get back into the Milton model. and begin to learn more about abstract language and trance.